Racist cops bury a black man alive in a shocking act of brutality, completely unaware that he's the newly elected sheriff of Ashwood County. This horrifying event wasn't just a crime. It became the spark that ignited a fight against corruption and deep-seated prejudice in Ashwood. What followed was an unyielding battle for survival, justice, and one man's relentless pursuit to reform a broken system from the inside out. Stay tuned for this gripping tale of courage and transformation. Don't forget to share where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Marcus Reed gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight as he stared at the road ahead. Today wasn't just another day, it was the day he would take office as the first black sheriff of Ashwood County, a place notorious for its racial divide and deeply rooted corruption. Adjusting the badge pinned to his chest, he caught the sunlight glinting off its surface. For most, it was simply a symbol of authority, but for Marcus, it stood for defiance, a beacon of hope in a county that had resisted change for generations. "They'll never accept you, Marcus." His mother's worried voice echoed in his mind, a warning she had given him weeks earlier. "It's too dangerous," his best friend had added, shaking his head. But Marcus hadn't listened. He wasn't naive about the risks. Growing up in Ashwood, he'd heard countless stories about the abuse of power, the unspoken rules dictating who could speak and who had to remain silent. That's precisely why he had taken the job, not just to fill a role, but to lead a fight he was determined to win. As Marcus approached the sheriff's office, he noticed a small group gathered along the road. His stomach sank. Protesters held up homemade signs, their messages unmistakable. "Not our sheriff, resign now, and keep Ashwood pure." The chants grew louder as he slowed his car. A man in a baseball cap slammed his palm against the hood of Marcus's car, yelling, "We don't need you here." Marcus tightened his grip on the wheel, remaining silent. He cracked the window just slightly, enough to speak without inciting more hostility. "Step aside," he said firmly. The man sneered, his eyes narrowing. "Go back to where you came from." Marcus met his glare without flinching. "I'm not going anywhere." He inched the car forward, forcing the protesters to move aside. Their hateful chants lingered in the air like smoke as he pulled into the parking lot. The hostility didn't waver as he parked. A woman with a megaphone stood near the entrance, her voice slicing through the din. "This is our county, not his," she shouted. She turned as Marcus exited the car, her eyes blazing with contempt. "You think you can just waltz in here and change everything? You don't belong." Marcus adjusted his jacket, standing tall and calm. "I was elected to serve this county," he said, his voice carrying above the noise. "All of it." The crowd murmured uneasily, but the woman wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You think that shiny badge will protect you? They'll eat you alive." Marcus took a step forward, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Let them try." Inside the office, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Conversations halted as Marcus walked through the building. Officers and staff cast sharp, appraising looks his way. He hadn't expected a warm reception, but the outright hostility on some faces was impossible to ignore. Deputy Clara Boyd, one of the few who had publicly supported him during the campaign, approached him with a clipboard in hand. "Sheriff Reed," she said, her tone professional but cautious. "Your office is ready." Marcus nodded, following her down the hallway. He wasn't rattled by the stairs, he'd expected them. What unsettled him was the muttered comment from a burly officer leaning against the wall. "Won't last a week," the man said loud enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus stopped and turned to face him. "Got something to say to me directly, Deputy?" The officer smirked, crossing his arms. "Just making an observation. Ashwood's not exactly friendly to outsiders, especially ones who don't know their place." Marcus stepped closer, his tone ice cold. "Let me make one thing clear. I'm not here to play nice. I'm here to do my job. If you've got a problem with that, there's the door." The officer's smirk faltered, but he didn't back down. Clara quickly intervened. "That's enough, Henderson," she said sharply. "Get back to work." Henderson shrugged and walked off, muttering under his breath, "We'll see who lasts longer." Once inside his office, Marcus leaned against the desk, exhaling slowly. Clara lingered by the door, her expression serious. "Don't let them get to you, Sheriff," she said. "Most of them are just testing you. They'll come around." Marcus shook his head. Not all of them will, and that's fine. I didn't take this job to win a popularity contest. I didn't take this job to win popularity contests, Marcus said firmly. Deputy Clara Boyd hesitated, but eventually nodded. Still, be careful, she warned. This place has a way of chewing people up. Marcus met her gaze, his resolve unwavering. I'm not here to be chewed up. I'm here to clean up. And if that makes me enemies, so be it. Clara gave a faint smile, though worry lingered in her eyes. For what it's worth, Sheriff, you've got my support. Just don't try to take on the whole county by yourself. Outside, the chants of the protesters grew louder, filtering through the office window. Marcus sat at his desk and opened the first of many files, a stack of complaints and reports he planned to review. The weight of the day pressed heavily on him, but he refused to let it show. Glancing out the window, he could still see the protesters' signs waving in the fading sunlight. This was Ashwood County, entrenched, unyielding, and fiercely resistant to change. But Marcus Reed had made a promise, one he fully intended to honor no matter the cost. As the chants grew louder, Marcus braced himself. This was only the beginning, and the real battles were still ahead. Marcus drove down the cracked asphalt of one of the county's back roads, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The echoes of that morning's protests weighed on him, but his focus was clear, reaching the sheriff's office and starting his first official day in uniform. Suddenly, a flicker of light in his rearview mirror caught his attention, flashing red and blue lights. A patrol car sped toward him, sirens cutting through the silence. Marcus frowned, checking his speedometer. He wasn't speeding, and his car was in perfect condition. He signaled and pulled to the side of the road, the patrol car pulling in aggressively close behind him. Two officers stepped out. The first, Officer Clint Morris, was a burly man with a scowl seemingly etched permanently onto his face. The second, Officer Travis Sloan, was younger and wiry, his smug expression practically plastered on. Clint tapped on Marcus's window with the butt of a flashlight. "License and registration," he said brusquely, skipping any sort of greeting. Marcus moved deliberately, retrieving his documents from the glove compartment before handing them over. He met Clint's eyes calmly. "Morning, officers. Is there a problem?" Clint ignored the question, snorting as he examined the license. "What brings you out here?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "I'm heading to the sheriff's office," Marcus replied evenly. "Today's my first day." Travis, who had been leaning into the car and peering at Marcus's belongings, let out a sharp laugh. "Your first day as what? The janitor?" Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel, but kept his face composed. "As sheriff," he said, his voice steady. Clint raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a sneer. "Sheriff? That's funny. I don't remember hearing about an election that put you in charge." Travis leaned against the car door, his smirk widening. "Let me guess," he said mockingly. "You're here to clean up this county, huh? Some big hero riding in to save the day." Without warning, Clint crumpled Marcus's license in his hand and tossed it onto the passenger seat. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he complied. As soon as he opened the door, Clint grabbed him by the arm and spun him toward the patrol car. "Hands on the hood," Clint barked. Marcus hesitated for a moment. "Is this really necessary?" Clint shoved him forward, pressing him against the car. "Did I stutter?" Meanwhile, Travis began rummaging through Marcus's car with unnecessary force, scattering papers, a briefcase, and other belongings onto the gravel road. "Nice setup you've got here," Travis muttered, holding up Marcus's badge as though it were a child's toy. "Too bad it doesn't mean squat out here." Clint patted Marcus down roughly, his movements designed more to humiliate than to search. "What's the matter, Sheriff?" he asked mockingly. "Not used to being treated like everyone else?" Marcus's voice remained calm, though his patience was wearing thin. "I'm used to being treated with respect," he replied. Clint leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Respect is earned, and you haven't earned a damn thing in this county." Travis approached, holding a folder he had pulled from Marcus's briefcase. "What's this?" he asked, flipping it open. "Plans for a new sheriff's office? Guess you're not planning to stick around long enough to see it happen." Marcus straightened slightly, his patience nearly gone. "If you're finished, I'd like to be on my way." Clint stepped back, crossing his arms as he stared Marcus down. "You think you can waltz into Ashwood and start giving orders?" Marcus met Clint's gaze with unflinching resolve. I'm here to enforce the law, not break it. Are you? The tension between them was palpable, crackling in the air like static. Travis let out a low whistle. Bold talk for a guy who just got pulled over. Clint smirked, bending down to retrieve Marcus's crumpled license from the ground. He wiped it theatrically on his sleeve before handing it back. Get back in your car, Sheriff, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. And watch your step. Wouldn't want you tripping on that big badge of yours. Marcus climbed back into his car, his movements slow and deliberate, his face betraying none of the simmering anger inside. As he started the engine and drove off, he watched in the rearview mirror as Clint and Travis stood by their patrol car, laughing. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. If they thought intimidation would scare him off, they were sorely mistaken. Marcus climbed back into his car, his hands steady despite the anger boiling just beneath the surface. Through the rearview mirror, he watched as Clint Morris and Travis Sloan returned to their patrol car, their laughter echoing in the otherwise quiet road. Travis gestured toward Marcus's car, shaking his head in mock disbelief. Just as Marcus turned the key in the ignition, the shrill sound of a siren pierced the air once more. He glanced in the mirror, a mixture of irritation and disbelief crossing his face. The patrol car's lights flashed again as it pulled up behind him for the second time. Clint and Travis stepped out, their expressions harder now, their movements more aggressive. Travis knocked on the window, his knuckles sharp against the glass. Out, now. Marcus rolled the window down slightly, keeping his voice calm. What's the issue this time? Clint stepped forward, leaning close to the window, his face mere inches from Marcus's. You didn't signal back there, he said flatly. Marcus frowned. The road was straight. There wasn't anywhere to turn. Clint smirked, his tone dripping with condescension. Are you arguing with me? Exhaling slowly, Marcus kept his composure. No, I'm asking for clarification. Without warning, Clint yanked the door open and gestured sharply for Marcus to step out. This time, Marcus moved slower, his frustration now showing in his deliberate movements. Travis circled around to the passenger side, once again rummaging through Marcus's car. He pulled out Marcus's badge and tossed it carelessly onto the hood. Your badge doesn't mean anything out here, Sheriff, he said mockingly. Out here, we decide who's in charge. Clint shoved Marcus toward the patrol car, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. You don't belong here, Reed, and we're going to make sure you don't forget it. The situation teetered on the edge of control. Marcus could feel the raw hostility in every word, every motion, and every glare. He knew this wasn't about a simple traffic stop. This was a message. Travis moved closer, his smirk darkening into something more sinister. This isn't the city, Sheriff. Out here, you play by our rules, and rule number 1, know your place. Marcus met Clint's gaze, his voice steady despite the crackling tension in the air. I know exactly where I stand. Do you? The moment hung heavy, the air thick with unspoken threats. Neither man backed down. Finally, Clint stepped back, but not before delivering one last warning. Watch yourself, Reed. Next time, we won't be so polite. Marcus climbed back into his car, his movements deliberate, his anger simmering but controlled. He started the engine, watching in the mirror as Clint and Travis stood motionless, their faces hard and unrelenting. As the patrol car's engine roared back to life, Marcus drove onto another stretch of empty road. A sinking feeling twisted in his gut. Moments later, those familiar red and blue lights lit up his rearview mirror for the third time. He pulled over again, his movements deliberate, though this time his irritation gave way to dread. Clint and Travis stepped out, their postures even more aggressive than before. Clint adjusted his belt as he strode toward Marcus's window, his eyes narrowing. Out of the car, Clint snapped, knocking on the window. Marcus lowered it slightly, his tone calm but firm. What's the issue now? Clint's face hardened, his voice flat. Step out, now. Marcus hesitated but complied. The moment he opened the door, Clint yanked him out by the arm, spinning him around and slamming him against the patrol car. Hands where I can see them. Clint barked. Marcus gritted his teeth, feeling Clint's hand press firmly against the back of his neck, pinning him down. This is unnecessary, Marcus said through clenched teeth. Travis moved to the passenger side, rifling through Marcus's car once again, tossing papers and belongings onto the ground. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, turning his head slightly. Clint shoved him harder against the car. "Stay still," he growled. Travis emerged, holding a small plastic bag filled with white powder. His grin widened as he waved it mockingly. "Look what we found," he said. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "That's not mine, and you know it." Travis shrugged, tossing the bag onto the ground. "Doesn't matter. Who do you think they'll believe?" Clint pulled Marcus back from the car, forcing him to his knees on the gravel shoulder. "See, Reed," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "You came into this county thinking you could change everything. But you're just another outsider who doesn't know his place." Marcus straightened his back despite the weight of Clint's hand pressing on his shoulder. His voice was firm, unwavering. "I know exactly what my place is, and it's not under the boots of men like you." Clint's expression twisted in anger. Without warning, he shoved Marcus to the ground, the sharp gravel cutting into his palms and knees. Travis sauntered over, leaning casually against the patrol car as Clint loomed over Marcus. "You've got guts," Travis said with a smirk. "Too bad they won't get you very far." Clint pointed toward a patch of dirt just off the road. "Start digging," he ordered. Marcus glanced up, defiance flashing in his eyes. "You're not going to get away with this." Clint's boot connected with Marcus's ribs, sending him sprawling. "Did I say you could talk?" Travis chuckled as he grabbed a shovel from the trunk of their patrol car. "Don't worry, Sheriff," he said mockingly. "We'll take care of the heavy lifting." Travis pulled a shovel from the patrol car's trunk and tossed it to Clint. "Don't worry, Sheriff," Travis said with a sneer. "We'll take care of this ourselves." Clint gripped the shovel and plunged it into the dirt, each thrust of the blade deliberate and violent. Clumps of soil flew into the air as the hole grew steadily deeper. Marcus tried to push himself up, but Travis pressed a knee firmly into his back, pinning him down. "Just stay still and enjoy the view," Travis sneered. When the hole was roughly 3 feet deep, Clint tossed the shovel aside and grabbed Marcus by the collar, dragging him toward the edge of the pit. "Time for you to take your place," Clint said coldly, shoving Marcus into the hole. Marcus landed hard, the packed dirt jarring his shoulders and hips. Before he could move, Clint and Travis began piling soil on top of him. "You've got a big mouth, Reed," Clint said, scooping another handful of dirt. "Let's see how much you can talk with this on top of you." Travis laughed, patting down the soil with his hands. "Consider this your initiation, Sheriff." Marcus struggled, but the weight of the dirt quickly became overwhelming. His arms were pinned to his sides, his legs immobilized. "This is your county now, huh?" Clint said mockingly as he added more dirt. "Looks like you're finally part of it." With every shovel full, the pit grew tighter. Marcus's breath came in short, shallow gasps as the weight of the soil pressed against his chest, restricting his movements. Only his head remained exposed, the rest of his body encased in suffocating dirt. Travis crouched beside the pit, his smirk widening. "I'd get comfortable if I were you," he said darkly. "We'll be back. Maybe." The two men dusted off their hands, their laughter fading as they climbed back into the patrol car. The sound of the engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped off, leaving Marcus alone in the crushing silence. The weight of the soil seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Marcus tilted his head back, his eyes fixed on the sliver of sky visible above. The world felt impossibly small, reduced to the narrow band of air he could still reach. In the quiet, his father's voice echoed in his mind. "Sometimes life will bury you, son, but it's up to you to decide whether you stay down or fight your way out." The memory sparked something deep within Marcus. He clenched his fists, though his fingers barely moved within the compacted dirt. He forced himself to focus on his breathing, staying calm. Panicking would only waste precious energy he couldn't afford to lose. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the empty road. The air grew colder, and Marcus's muscles ached from being immobilized. Exhaustion tugged at him, but he refused to let it take hold. In the distance, a faint rumble broke the stillness. It grew louder, closer, until the beams of headlights illuminated the roadside. Marcus's heart raced. Mustering every ounce of energy he had left, he called out, "Help." His voice was weak, barely audible, but the truck slowed. Its door creaked open, and a man stepped out, his figure silhouetted against the headlights. "Lord Almighty," the man muttered, rushing toward the pit. Hope flickered in Marcus's chest as the man knelt beside him. Despite the crushing weight of the soil, Marcus's determination burned brighter. The man's weathered hands began to dig, scooping dirt away with urgent movements. Walter Briggs had seen his fair share of trouble in Ashwood County. A lifelong farmer, with a face weathered by time and calloused hands that bore years of hard labor, Walter had long learned the value of keeping his head down. But tonight, as his old pickup truck rumbled along the dimly lit road, something pulled him from his routine. A faint cry for help, barely audible over the hum of the engine, made him slow to a stop. Walter stepped out with his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. It landed on a mound of dirt near the roadside. His breath hitched as he realized what he was seeing: a man buried up to his neck, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. "Help," the man rasped, his voice weak. Walter dropped to his knees beside the pit, his heart racing. "What the hell happened here?" he asked, his voice thick with urgency. "Police," Marcus managed to croak. "They did this." Walter's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of brutality in Ashwood, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. Without another word, he sprinted back to his truck and grabbed a shovel. "Hold on," Walter said, plunging the blade into the dirt. "I'm getting you out." He worked with frantic determination, scooping away the compacted soil that encased Marcus. The night air was cool, but sweat dripped down Walter's brow as he dug deeper. "You're gonna be all right," Walter muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. "Just stay with me." Each scoop brought Marcus closer to freedom. Finally, Walter uncovered his chest and arms. Tossing the shovel aside, Walter reached down and grabbed Marcus under the arms, pulling him out of the pit with a grunt of effort. Marcus staggered as he tried to stand, his legs trembling from hours of confinement. Walter caught him before he could fall. "Easy there," Walter said, steadying him. Marcus leaned on Walter for support, his breath still labored but his resolve unbroken. Walter guided him toward the truck, his mind racing as he glanced around nervously. "Whoever did this," Walter said, climbing into the driver's seat, "they're not gonna let you walk away. We've got to get out of here." The truck bounced along the rough dirt road, heading toward the safety of Walter's farmhouse. Marcus leaned back in the passenger seat, his body aching but his determination stronger than ever. Walter reached down and pulled Marcus out of the pit with a grunt of effort. Marcus staggered as he tried to stand, his legs trembling from hours of confinement. Walter caught him before he could collapse. "Easy there," Walter said, guiding Marcus toward the truck. As Marcus climbed into the passenger seat, Walter glanced around nervously. The road was eerily quiet now, but he couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. "Whoever did this," Walter said as he climbed into the driver's seat, "they're gonna come looking for you. We need to get out of here." The truck bounced along the uneven dirt road leading to Walter's farmhouse. Inside, Marcus leaned back, his breathing still labored. Walter handed him a bottle of water and watched as Marcus drained it in seconds. "What's your name?" Walter asked. "Marcus Reed," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse. "I'm the new sheriff." Walter's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Figures," he muttered. "This county doesn't take kindly to change, especially not the kind you're bringing." Marcus turned his head to look at Walter, his gaze sharp despite his exhaustion. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" Walter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "Seen it, lived it, kept my mouth shut every damn time." When they reached the farmhouse, a modest structure surrounded by sprawling fields cloaked in darkness, Walter helped Marcus inside and settled him into an old armchair near the fireplace. "Sit tight," Walter said, fetching a damp cloth and a first aid kit. He began cleaning the dirt from Marcus's face and hands, his movements careful but deliberate. "You're lucky I came along," Walter said. "Not many folks would stop, let alone get involved." "Why did you?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Walter paused, his hand hovering over the cloth. "Because I couldn't stand by anymore," he admitted. "I've seen too much, good people getting hurt, pushed out, silenced. I figured it wasn't my fight. But seeing you like that..." He shook his head, his voice breaking slightly. "That was enough for me." As the fire crackled in the hearth, Marcus recounted everything that had happened. The traffic stops, the fabricated evidence, and the pit. Walter listened intently, his expression darkening with every word. "Bastards," Walter muttered. "They think they're untouchable." "They have been," Marcus said. "But not anymore." Walter leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So what's your plan, Sheriff? You can't just walk into the office tomorrow like nothing happened." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't have a choice. If I don't fight this, they'll keep doing it. To me, to anyone who stands up to them." Walter studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. But you'll need more than guts to take them down. They've got friends in high places, and they'll use every trick in the book to bury you again." The conversation shifted to strategy. Marcus needed allies, people who had experienced similar abuse and were willing to speak up. Walter agreed to help, offering to reach out to a few neighbors who had long complained about the county's corruption but had been too afraid to act. "It's going to take more than talk," Walter warned. "You'll need proof, hard evidence, something they can't sweep under the rug." Marcus nodded. "I'll find it, but I'll need time and trust." Walter gave a faint smile. "You've got mine for what it's worth." The night wore on as Marcus rested, his body aching but his resolve unshaken. Walter sat nearby, his gaze fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. "This fight you're starting," Walter said quietly, "it's not going to be easy. They're going to come at you with everything they've got." Marcus opened his eyes, meeting Walter's steady gaze. "I'm ready." Walter nodded, his expression somber but resolute. "Then you better not back down, because if you do, they win." The road ahead would be treacherous, Walter reminded him. But Marcus knew that with the right allies and unwavering determination, he could turn the tide. The next morning, Marcus Reed walked through the front doors of the Ashwood County Sheriff's Office, his badge clipped to his chest and his shoulders squared. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his body from the ordeal of the previous night, but he refused to show it. Inside, the office buzzed with activity. Phones rang, deputies shuffled papers, and the low hum of conversation filled the air. But as Marcus stepped further into the room, the chatter died down. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and an uneasy silence settled over the room. A few deputies glanced at Marcus, their expressions ranging from indifference to outright disdain. One officer leaned against his desk, muttering something to his colleague, who chuckled in response. Deputy Clara Boyd, one of the few officers who had shown Marcus any support, approached him with a clipboard. "Sheriff Reed," she said, her tone professional. "Morning briefing starts in 10 minutes. Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Deputy Boyd." As she turned to leave, Marcus caught sight of an officer smirking at him from across the room. Another test. But Marcus wasn't about to let them see him flinch. "Morning briefing in 10 minutes, Deputy Clara Boyd said, handing Marcus a clipboard. Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Boyd." As Clara turned to leave, a tall, broad-shouldered deputy named Frank Grayson stepped forward, deliberately blocking Marcus's path. "Morning, Sheriff," Grayson said, the word sheriff dripping with sarcasm. "Hope you had a good first night." Marcus met Grayson's gaze, his expression calm. "It was eventful. Anything I can help you with, Deputy?" Grayson smirked. "Just wanted to welcome you properly, let you know how things work around here." Another deputy sitting nearby chimed in, grinning. "Yeah, Sheriff, we've got a way of doing things. Don't know if you're up to speed yet." The room tensed as Marcus took a step closer to Grayson, his voice steady but firm. "If you have something to say, Deputy, say it outright. Otherwise, I suggest you get back to work." Grayson's smirk faltered, but he didn't back down. "Sure thing, Sheriff," he said, the mockery still evident in his tone. The morning briefing was held in a cramped meeting room at the back of the office. Marcus stood at the front, a stack of papers in hand, as the deputies filed in. He could feel the tension in the room, the weight of their skepticism pressing down on him like a heavy fog. Clearing his throat, he began. "Good morning. As many of you know, today marks the start of a new administration. I ran on a promise to bring transparency, accountability, and fairness to this office, and I intend to keep that promise." A low murmur rippled through the room. One deputy leaned over to whisper something to his neighbor, who smirked and shook his head. Marcus pressed on, undeterred. "I've reviewed some of the complaints that have been filed against this department in recent years. Starting today, We'll be implementing new protocols to ensure that we're serving this community with integrity. Grayson raised his hand, his expression feigning curiosity. Sheriff, are you saying we haven't been doing our jobs right? Marcus locked eyes with him. I'm saying there's room for improvement. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Before Marcus could continue, the door swung open. Clint Morris and Travis Sloan strode in, their swagger unmistakable. All eyes turned to the two officers as they casually made their way to the back of the room. Clint leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while Travis pulled out a chair and sat down, grinning. "Morning, Sheriff," Clint said, his tone laced with false cheer. "Didn't mean to interrupt. Please, go on." Marcus straightened, his gaze hardening. "You're late." Travis shrugged, his grin widening. "Got caught up on something. You know how it is." Clint chuckled, the sound low and mocking. "Yeah, real busy making sure the county runs smoothly." The jab wasn't subtle, and Marcus wasn't about to let it slide. "Glad you could join us," he said sharply. "This meeting is about the changes we'll be making to ensure that everyone in this office is held to the highest standards. That includes showing up on time." Clint raised an eyebrow, his smirk unfazed. "Changes, huh? Sounds like a lot of work for someone new to the job." Travis leaned back in his chair, his grin widening further. "We've been here a long time, Sheriff. We know how this county works. Might be a little overwhelming for someone fresh out of the gate." The unspoken challenge hung in the air, thick with tension. Marcus set his papers down on the table and stepped closer to the two deputies. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I am new, but I'm not here to play by the old rules. I'm here to make sure this department works for everyone in this county, not just a select few." Clint's smirk finally faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Careful, Reed. This job isn't as easy as it looks, and if you're not careful, you might find yourself in over your head." Marcus took another step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "I'm not the one who should be careful, Deputy. I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." The room fell deathly silent. For a moment, it seemed like Clint might push further, but Travis nudged him and stood up, stretching lazily. "Well, this has been fun," Travis said, "but we've got actual work to do." Clint lingered for a moment longer, his jaw tight, before following Travis out of the room. The meeting continued, but the mood had shifted. Marcus could see the unease in some of the deputies' faces, the questions lingering in their eyes. He knew he hadn't won them over yet, but he wasn't here to win a popularity contest. He was here to dismantle a system that had been broken for far too long. As the deputies filed out of the room, Clara approached him, her expression tense. "They're testing you," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "I know." "Clint and Travis, they're not going to stop," Clara said, glancing over her shoulder. "You need to be careful." Marcus met her gaze, his expression hard. "If they think intimidation is going to stop me, they're wrong." Marcus understood what was at stake. To bring real change, he would have to confront the very people who thrived under the broken system. And he was ready for the fight. Personnel files were spread across Marcus Reed's desk, each page a damning account of misconduct, negligence, and unchecked power. Most of the evidence pointed directly at Clint Morris and Travis Sloan. The deeper Marcus dug, the clearer the picture became. These men weren't just bad cops. They were deeply entrenched in a network of corruption that extended far beyond the sheriff's office. His finger traced over the details of an especially troubling complaint from a few years back. A local business owner had accused Clint and Travis of extorting money under the guise of protection fees. The case had been dismissed, but Marcus now recognized a pattern. The victim had recanted under suspicious circumstances, and the file had been buried, marked as resolved. A knock on the door pulled Marcus from his thoughts. Clara Boyd stepped inside, her voice low. "You called?" she asked, glancing at the files spread across his desk. Marcus gestured for her to sit. "I need someone I can trust," he said. "These files, they're worse than I expected. Extortion, brutality, falsifying evidence, ties to a local gang. It's all here, but none of it ever went anywhere." Clara frowned, her jaw tightening. "They've got connections, Sheriff. People willing to cover for them. If you're digging into this, you need to be careful. They'll catch wind of it." "I'm not stopping," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "If we let this go, it'll just keep happening." Clara hesitated, then gave a curt nod. I'm with you, but we need proof. Solid, irrefutable proof. The next few days were spent gathering evidence. Marcus worked late into the night, poring over old reports and interviewing residents who had filed complaints. Most were hesitant to talk, their voices hushed, their eyes darting around as if someone were watching. They'll come after me if they find out I talked, one man whispered during a meeting at a secluded diner. They've got people everywhere. Another woman, a mother of two, had tears streaming down her face as she recounted how Travis had threatened her family after her husband refused to pay a bribe. I can't go through that again, she pleaded. Please, just leave me out of it. Despite the fear, Marcus managed to piece together a timeline of their activities. The reports linked Clint and Travis to a local gang known as the Ashwood Riders, who controlled much of the county's illegal activity. It became clear that the deputies weren't just turning a blind eye, they were actively profiting from the arrangement. One night, while reviewing surveillance footage, Clara had discreetly obtained Marcus's phone buzzed. The number was blocked. He hesitated, then answered cautiously. This is Reed. A distorted voice came through the line. You think you're clever, don't you? Digging where you don't belong. Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? The voice chuckled, the sound cold and menacing. A friendly warning, Sheriff. Drop the investigation. Walk away while you still can. The line went dead. Marcus slammed the phone onto his desk, anger surging. Clara entered moments later, alarmed by the noise. What happened? They know, Marcus said grimly. Someone tipped them off. The next day, rumors began circulating around the office. Deputies whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward Marcus whenever he walked by. The hostility that had been simmering now boiled over, with several officers openly questioning his authority. In the break room, Frank Grayson leaned casually against the counter, a smug grin on his face. Word is, you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, he said. Marcus ignored him, calmly pouring himself a cup of coffee. Careful, Sheriff, Grayson continued, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. Wouldn't want you to get in over your head. Marcus turned to face him, his expression unreadable. Is there something you want to say, Grayson? Grayson shrugged, his grin widening. Just looking out for you. This county has a way of chewing people up, especially outsiders. Before Marcus could respond, Clara appeared in the doorway, her expression tense. Sheriff, we need to talk, now. In Marcus's office, Clara closed the door behind her. Her face was pale. It's Grayson, she said. He's the one who tipped off Clint and Travis. I overheard him talking to Sloan on the phone this morning. Marcus exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. That explains the rumors. They're trying to discredit me before I can take this public. Clara leaned forward, her voice urgent. You need to act fast. If they know what you're doing, they'll start covering their tracks. Or worse. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. I'm bringing in state investigators, he said. This is bigger than us. We need outside help. Clara hesitated. That's going to ruffle a lot of feathers. Good, Marcus replied. Let them know the days of looking the other way are over. That evening, Marcus received another message. A single envelope was slipped under his office door. Inside was a photograph of his car, its windshield cracked and tires slashed. On the back of the photo, written in bold, jagged letters, were the words, You're next. The photograph in Marcus Reed's hand showed his car, spray-painted in bold red letters, We're watching. Clara Boyd entered the office and found him staring at it, his face grim. They're trying to scare you, she said. Marcus tossed the photo onto his desk. It's going to take more than this. Clara crossed her arms, her voice firm. Then we hit back harder. What's the next move? Marcus's gaze hardened. We get the proof we need, and make sure everyone sees it. They've been hiding behind their badges for too long. It's time to take them down. The investigation had already exposed the corruption festering at the core of the department. But Marcus knew this wasn't just about Clint Morris and Travis Sloan. It was about an entire network that thrived on intimidation, fear, and silence. The radio crackled to life in Marcus's patrol car as he drove down a desolate stretch of Route 19. Possible disturbance reported near the old mill. Vehicle stop involving a young male. Deputies Morris and Sloan on scene. Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel at the mention of their names. Clint Morris and Travis Sloan. The mere thought of them was enough to put him on edge. He pressed the accelerator, the car surging forward as he raced toward the scene. When Marcus arrived, the beams of his headlights illuminated a tense standoff. A young black man stood by an old pickup truck, his hands raised high in the air. His face was pale with fear. Clint Morris loomed over him, one hand resting dangerously on the grip of his holstered gun. Nearby, Travis Sloan was rifling through the truck's interior with exaggerated flair, tossing belongings onto the ground. Marcus stepped out of his car, his boots crunching on the gravel. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Clint turned, his expression shifting into a mock display of friendliness. "Evening, Sheriff. Just doing a routine traffic stop. This guy here looks a little suspicious." The young man, barely more than a teenager, spoke quickly, his voice trembling. "I didn't do anything, sir. I was just driving home." "Quiet," Clint barked, his glare silencing the boy. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Clint's. "What's the probable cause, Morris?" Travis emerged from the truck, grinning as he held up a small plastic bag filled with white powder. "Found this tucked under the seat," he said, his tone smug. "Looks like our friend here has some explaining to do." The young man's eyes widened in panic. "That's not mine, I swear. I don't know how that got there." Marcus scanned the scene, his mind racing. He could see the setup as plain as day. "Put the bag down, Sloan," Marcus ordered, his tone firm. "We're going to handle this the right way." Clint stepped forward, his posture aggressive. "The right way? We already found the evidence, Sheriff. This kid's guilty. End of story." Marcus's eyes didn't leave Clint's. "The right way," he repeated, his voice steady, "means following procedure. This stop is over." Clint's expression darkened. His hand moved to unclip his gun. "You're making a mistake, Reed. This kid is trouble, and you're letting him walk." Marcus stepped between Clint and the young man, his body tense but his voice calm. "He's walking because there's no legitimate cause to hold him, and if you try anything, you'll answer to me." Travis laughed from the side, shaking his head. "You've got guts, Sheriff, but you're outnumbered here." Marcus ignored him, keeping his focus on Clint. "Stand down, Morris, now." The tension reached a boiling point when Clint suddenly drew his weapon, pointing it directly at the young man. The boy froze, his hands shaking as he stared down the barrel of the gun. "Let's see how tough you are now, Sheriff," Clint said, his voice a cold challenge. Marcus's pulse quickened, but he refused to let his fear show. He raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. "Lower your weapon, Morris. There's no justification for this." Clint's grip tightened on the gun. His eyes flicked between Marcus and the boy. "He's guilty, Reed. You know it. He's just another punk who's going to cause trouble." The young man's voice broke through, desperate and trembling. "Please, I didn't do anything." Marcus took another step forward, placing himself directly between Clint and the boy. "If you pull that trigger, Morris, you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars. Is that what you want?" For a moment, the standoff hung in the balance. The air was thick with tension. Travis shifted uncomfortably, his confidence faltering. "Mark," he muttered, "put the gun down. This is getting out of hand." Clint's jaw tightened, but his hand wavered. Marcus took a slow, deliberate step closer, his voice low and intense. "You think you're untouchable, Morris, but you're not. Drop the weapon. Now." Finally, Clint lowered the gun, his face twisted in fury. He stepped back, his chest heaving as he glared at Marcus. "You're making a big mistake," he spat. Marcus ignored the threat and turned to the young man, his voice softer now. "Get in your truck and go home. You're free to go." The boy hesitated, disbelief etched across his face. Then, with a nod of gratitude, he climbed into his truck and drove off, the sound of the engine fading into the night. As soon as the boy was gone, Marcus turned back to Clint and Travis, his expression cold and resolute. "This stops now," he said. "Both of you. Consider yourselves on notice. One more stunt like this, and you're done." Clint didn't respond, but the anger in his eyes burned bright. Travis muttered something under his breath as the two climbed into their patrol car and sped off. Marcus stood in the gravel road, the adrenaline slowly fading from his system. He knew this confrontation wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. But he also knew he had done the right thing, and that was enough to keep him moving forward. As the sound of the young man's truck faded into the night, Marcus Reed turned back to Clint Morris and Travis Sloan. His expression was cold and resolute. "This stops now," Marcus said, his voice firm. "You're both suspended, effective immediately." Clint stepped closer, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do that," he growled. "You don't know who you're messing with." Marcus didn't flinch. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And I know you've abused your authority for the last time." Travis shook his head, his smirk returning. "You think this is over? You think a suspension is going to stop us?" Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "It's not a suspension. It's the beginning of an investigation. Pack your things. You're done." Clint and Travis exchanged a glance, their expressions hardening. Without another word, they climbed into their patrol car and sped off, their taillights disappearing into the darkness. Marcus stood alone on the gravel road, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. He knew this decisive action would ignite a firestorm of backlash, but it had to be done. The following morning, Marcus Reed stood in front of the assembled deputies in the Ashwood County Sheriff's Office. His expression was firm, his shoulders squared. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on him, but he didn't hesitate. "Effective immediately," he announced, his voice cutting through the room. "Deputies Clint Morris and Travis Sloan are suspended. There will be a formal investigation into their conduct, led by state authorities." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Some deputies exchanged uneasy glances, while others sat stiffly, their faces etched with barely concealed anger. Frank Grayson stood at the back, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. Clara Boyd stepped forward. Standing beside Marcus, her voice was clear and resolute. "This is non-negotiable. We're here to enforce the law, not abuse it. If anyone has an issue with that, you're welcome to leave." The room fell silent, tension hanging heavy in the air. Marcus scanned the faces of his team, then continued. "I know this isn't easy, but I'm not here to protect the status quo. I'm here to clean up this department, and that starts now." Within hours of the announcement, the news spread like wildfire. By the afternoon, Clint Morris had organized a press conference on the courthouse steps. He stood before a small group of supporters, his voice filled with righteous indignation as cameras captured his every word. "This suspension is nothing more than a power grab," Clint declared, gesturing emphatically. "Sheriff Reed is abusing his authority to settle personal vendettas. He's new to this county, and he doesn't understand how we operate." A reporter raised her hand. "Deputy Morris, are you saying the suspension is unwarranted?" Clint nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. My record speaks for itself. This so-called investigation is a witch hunt. The people of Ashwood deserve better." Standing beside him, Travis Sloan chimed in. "Reed doesn't care about this community. He's an outsider trying to tear us apart." The crowd murmured in agreement, and the cameras kept rolling. Back at the sheriff's office, Marcus watched the press conference on a small TV in his office. His jaw tightened with every word. Clara entered, holding a stack of papers. "You're going to want to see this," she said, setting them on his desk. Marcus flipped through the documents. "What is it?" "Reports from this morning," Clara explained. "People are calling in, saying they're losing faith in the department. Morris's rally is working. He's painting you as the villain." Marcus slammed the papers down, standing abruptly. "Enough is enough." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What's the plan?" "I'm calling a press conference of my own," Marcus said. That evening, Marcus stood behind a podium outside the sheriff's office. Reporters crowded around, microphones and cameras pointed in his direction. Behind him, Clara and a few other supportive staff stood as a united front. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Today, I made the decision to suspend deputies Clint Morris and Travis Sloan, pending a formal investigation into serious allegations of misconduct. Let me be clear, this decision was not made lightly." A reporter interrupted. "Sheriff Reed, Morris claims you're abusing your authority. What's your response?" Marcus met the reporter's gaze without flinching. "This isn't about me. It's about holding everyone in this department accountable. No one is above the law, not even those who wear a badge." Another reporter chimed in. "Morris also said you're an outsider trying to destroy Ashwood's way of life. How do you respond to that accusation?" Marcus's eyes hardened. If standing up against corruption and abuse means changing the way of life in this county, then so be it. I was elected to serve the people, all the people, not to protect a broken system. The reporters murmured, jotting down notes. "And let me add this," Marcus continued, his voice rising with conviction. "This investigation is not an attack on this community. It's an opportunity to rebuild trust, to show that the Ashwood County Sheriff's Office works for everyone, not just a select few. If that makes me enemies, so be it." The crowd of reporters erupted with questions, but Marcus turned away, signaling the end of the conference. He had made his stand, and there was no turning back. "This investigation is not an attack on this community," Marcus Reed stated firmly at the press conference. "It's an opportunity to rebuild trust, to show that the Ashwood County Sheriff's Office works for everyone. If that makes me enemies, so be it." The next morning, the community was deeply divided. Supporters of Clint Morris and Travis Sloan doubled down, claiming Marcus had overstepped his authority. Their allies filled social media and local radio with accusations, branding Marcus a tyrant. At the same time, others rallied behind him, grateful that someone was finally addressing the corruption that had plagued Ashwood County for decades. Local activists and reform advocates began speaking out in his favor, creating a growing wave of support. In the midst of the chaos, the state investigators arrived. Two sharp-eyed officials entered the sheriff's office, briefcases in hand, their presence exuding authority. "Sheriff Reed," one of them said, extending a hand. "I'm Investigator Cole. We're here to begin the review." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for coming. I'll give you full access to anything you need." Standing nearby, Clara Boyd added, "We've already started gathering preliminary evidence. It's waiting in the conference room." The investigators nodded and got to work, their presence sending a clear message. The stakes had just been raised. Later that day, Marcus found a note slipped under his office door. The handwriting was scrawled and barely legible. "You've made a big mistake. Watch your back." Marcus read the note twice before crumpling it in his hand. Clara entered moments later, her expression tense. "You okay, Sheriff?" "Just another threat," Marcus said, tossing the note onto his desk. Clara frowned. "They're escalating. Morris and Sloan aren't just sitting back, they're planning something." "Let them try," Marcus replied, though he understood one thing with absolute clarity. Clint and Travis wouldn't stand still. They were already scheming their revenge. The morning started like any other, but unease hung in the air. Marcus walked out to the sheriff's office parking lot, his mind racing with plans for the day. Then he froze. Spray-painted in jagged red letters across the side of his patrol car were the words, "You'll pay for this." Marcus's stomach churned, but he forced himself to step closer and inspect the damage. The tires had been slashed, the windshield cracked, and a deep gouge ran along the driver's side door. It was a blatant act of intimidation, a warning meant to rattle him. Clara appeared at his side moments later, her face pale as she took in the scene. "They're escalating," she said grimly. "This isn't just a threat, they want you scared." Marcus's jaw tightened. "It's not gonna work," he said firmly, though the weight in his chest told a different story. Inside the office, Marcus's phone buzzed. He picked it up and saw a text from an unknown number. "This is your last chance. Walk away, or we'll make sure you regret it." Attached to the message was an image, a blurry photo of Marcus's house taken from the street. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone. His pulse raced. They weren't just targeting him professionally, they were invading his personal life. Clara entered his office as Marcus stood there, staring at the phone. Her brow furrowed when she saw his expression. "What is it now?" she asked. Marcus handed her the phone. He watched her reaction as she read the message. "Damn it," she muttered. "This is serious, Marcus. You need to tell the investigators." "I will," he said, his voice low but steady. "But this isn't just about me anymore. They're trying to scare everyone who stands with me." By midday, Marcus's team gathered in the conference room. He placed photos of the vandalized patrol car and the threatening text message on the table for everyone to see. The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. "This isn't just vandalism," Marcus said, his voice firm. "This is an attack on this department's integrity. Whoever did this wants to make us afraid. They want to stop us from doing our jobs." At the back of the room, Frank Grayson scoffed loudly. "Or maybe it's a sign you've pushed too hard, too fast. People don't like change. Sheriff, you're making a lot of enemies." Marcus locked eyes with him. "I'm not here to make friends, deputy. I'm here to do what's right. If that makes enemies, so be it. Clara stepped forward, her tone sharp. Whoever's behind this is desperate. They know the investigation is closing in. We need to stay united, or they'll win. The room fell silent. Marcus scanned the faces of his deputies. Some avoided his gaze. He knew not everyone in the department was on his side, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. That evening, Marcus drove home in a borrowed patrol car. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streets were eerily quiet. But the threat lingered in the back of his mind. Every shadow felt sharper, every noise louder. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus noticed a small package sitting on the front step. His pulse quickened as he approached it. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. He opened it cautiously, revealing a crudely assembled photo collage. The images showed him at the sheriff's office, leaving his house, walking through town, all taken without his knowledge. At the bottom of the collage was a note, scrawled in bold black ink. "You can't watch your back forever." Marcus's chest tightened. He carried the package inside, locking the door behind him. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a declaration of war. But Marcus knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. Sitting at his kitchen table, Marcus Reed's mind wandered to Jordan, the young man he had saved days earlier. He could still see the fear in Jordan's eyes when Clint Morris had pointed a gun at him, and the overwhelming relief when Marcus had stepped in. The memory steadied him. Jordan's quiet, heartfelt thank you replayed in Marcus's mind, reminding him why he had taken this job in the first place. The fight wasn't just about him. It was about every person in Ashwood County who had been silenced, threatened, or harmed by the corruption festering within the system. Marcus exhaled slowly, his resolve hardening. The next morning, Marcus called the state investigators to report the threats. Investigator Cole listened carefully, his expression growing darker as Marcus recounted the vandalism, the text message, and the ominous package. "We'll increase security around your house," Cole said, "but be aware, this isn't going to stop them. If anything, they'll push harder." Marcus nodded. "Let them. They can threaten me all they want, but I'm not backing down." Cole studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You've got guts, Sheriff. Just make sure you stay smart. We're getting closer to the truth, and they know it." Back at the office, Clara Boyd found Marcus in the evidence room, combing through files. "The investigators are doing their job," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "You don't have to do everything yourself." Marcus looked up, his expression resolute. "I can't afford to miss anything. This isn't just about uncovering the truth. It's about making sure it sticks. They've gotten away with too much for too long." Clara sighed but nodded. "Just don't let them get to you, Marcus. This department needs you to see this through." Marcus straightened, meeting her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, Marcus stood outside the sheriff's office, staring up at the dark sky. The threats weighed on him, but they couldn't break him. He had come to Ashwood to bring change, and he wasn't about to let fear dictate his actions. He knew that to fight corruption, he had to confront his fear head-on. The night was unnervingly quiet as Marcus drove along a remote stretch of Route 14. Earlier, he had received an anonymous tip, a supposed lead on a stash house linked to the Ashwood Riders gang. Though cautious of the source, Marcus knew ignoring it could mean missing a crucial break in his investigation. The road twisted through dense woods, the beam of his headlights cutting through the darkness. His instincts prickled, warning him that something felt off. He reached for the radio to check in with dispatch, but the signal crackled uselessly. A dead zone. As he approached the described location, a rundown barn barely visible in the moonlight, another set of headlights flared to life behind him. A truck roared forward, its engine growling as it closed the gap. The impact came hard and fast. The truck rammed the back of Marcus's patrol car, jolting him forward. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly, regaining control just as another hit sent his car skidding. Through the rearview mirror, Marcus spotted the familiar faces of Clint Morris and Travis Sloan in the truck's cab. Clint grinned, the headlights casting his expression into sharp relief. "Damn it," Marcus muttered, slamming on the brakes. The sudden deceleration forced the truck to swerve to avoid a collision. Marcus used the moment to veer off the road, speeding into a narrow dirt path that cut through the woods. The chase was on. The truck barreled after him, its size and power giving it an advantage on the rough terrain. Marcus's car jolted violently over roots and rocks, the suspension groaning with each impact. Clint leaned out of the truck's passenger window, a flashlight in one hand and a weapon in the other. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the trees as a bullet struck Marcus's side mirror, shattering it. "They're trying to kill me," Marcus thought, adrenaline surging. He kept one hand steady on the wheel while the other reached for the dash-mounted camera, activating its recording. The trail split ahead. Marcus made a sharp turn, his tires kicking up dirt as he took the narrower path. It was a gamble. The trail was barely wide enough for his car, let alone the truck. "Let's see you follow this," Marcus muttered under his breath. The truck hesitated at the fork, but ultimately followed, its wider frame scraping against the trees on either side. Clint's voice carried over the growl of the engine. "You're done, Reed? Should have stayed in the city where you belong." Marcus ignored the taunts, his focus locked on staying ahead. Up ahead, the trail ended abruptly, opening into a clearing near an old water tower. Marcus skidded to a stop, jumping out of the car before it fully halted. He sprinted toward the cover of the tower, ducking behind one of its rusted supports as the truck barreled into the clearing. Clint and Travis stepped out, their boots crunching on the gravel. Clint carried a shotgun, while Travis held a flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness. "You think you're smart, Sheriff?" Clint called out, his voice mocking. "There's no one out here to save you, just us." Travis scanned the area, his flashlight bouncing off the metal supports of the tower. "Come on out, Reed," Clint sneered. "Let's have a little talk." Marcus remained silent, his mind racing. He reached for his phone, ensuring the camera was still recording. Clint's voice grew impatient. "I'm done waiting." He fired a warning shot into the air, the blast echoing through the clearing. Using the noise as cover, Marcus moved stealthily along the base of the water tower, positioning himself behind the truck. He could hear the men arguing, Clint's tone growing angrier by the second. "We should have finished this on the road," Clint snapped. "Relax," Travis replied. "He's outnumbered. He's got nowhere to go." Marcus smirked grimly, his hands steady despite the tension. Quietly, he reached into the truck's open window, grabbing the keys from the ignition and slipping them into his pocket. The game had just changed. Travis Sloan's flashlight passed over Marcus Reed's patrol car. "Come on out, Reed," Travis taunted, his voice cutting through the night. "Let's have a little chat." Marcus remained silent, his mind racing. He reached for his phone, ensuring the camera was recording and angled toward the two men. Clint Morris grew impatient, firing a warning shot into the air. The loud blast echoed across the clearing. "Last chance, Reed," Clint shouted. "Come out, or we'll drag you out." Using the noise as cover, Marcus moved stealthily along the base of the water tower. Keeping low, he positioned himself behind the truck, listening as Clint and Travis argued. "We should have finished this back on the road," Clint snarled. "Relax," Travis replied. "He's outnumbered. He's got nowhere to go." Marcus smirked grimly, his hands steady despite the tension. Quietly, he reached into the truck's open window, grabbed the keys from the ignition, and slipped them into his pocket. The men spread out, their flashlights sweeping the clearing. Travis approached the tower, his flashlight bouncing off the rusted supports. Marcus crouched behind a stack of old crates, waiting for his moment. When Travis passed, Marcus moved with calculated precision. Springing up, Marcus grabbed Travis's arm and twisted it behind his back. Travis yelped in pain, his flashlight clattering to the ground. Marcus pinned him against the crate, his voice low but fierce. "Drop the gun." Travis hesitated but complied, letting the weapon fall to the dirt. The noise drew Clint's attention. He turned, shotgun raised. "Let him go, Reed." Marcus shifted, positioning Travis in front of him as a shield. His voice was calm but commanding. "Drop it, Clint. This is over." Clint's eyes darted between Marcus and Travis, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "You think you've won? You're dead, Reed. You hear me? Dead." Before Clint could act, the distant wail of sirens pierced the tension. Marcus had managed to hit his radio's distress signal during the chase, and backup was finally arriving. Clint hesitated, the sound of the sirens growing louder. With a frustrated growl, he threw the shotgun to the ground. "This isn't over," he spat, backing away. Marcus shoved Travis to the ground and stepped forward, his badge gleaming in the moonlight. "You're done, Clint, both of you." Deputies poured into the clearing, their flashlights and weapons trained on Clint and Travis. Clara Boyd was among them, her face set with determination. "Secure them," Marcus ordered, handing Clara his phone, the recording still running. "This is what we needed, proof." Clara nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You took a hell of a risk, Sheriff, but it paid off." Marcus exhaled, the adrenaline finally ebbing. With undeniable evidence in hand, he knew he was one step closer to justice. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Clint Morris and Travis Sloan sat at the defense table, their faces grim as the prosecutor methodically laid out the evidence. The recording Marcus Reed had captured during the ambush played on a large screen, the damning audio filling the room. "You're done, Reed? You're dead." Clint's voice snarled through the speakers. Gasps rippled through the gallery, where community members and reporters sat shoulder to shoulder. The prosecutor paused the video and turned to address the jury. "This recording is undeniable proof, not only of the defendant's intent to harm Sheriff Reed, but also of their blatant abuse of power." Marcus sat quietly at the front, his badge gleaming under the courtroom lights. Though his outward demeanor was calm, his chest tightened as the trial reached its crescendo. Witness after witness testified, adding weight to the case. Residents who had once been too afraid to speak now came forward, emboldened by Marcus's actions. A young father described how Travis had planted drugs in his car, threatening to jail him unless he paid a bribe. An elderly shopkeeper recounted how Clint had extorted her business, demanding protection fees while threatening her livelihood. Each testimony painted a harrowing picture of systemic corruption that went far beyond the two deputies. By the time the state investigators presented their findings, connecting Clint and Travis to the Ashwood Riders gang and implicating several other officers, the case was airtight. The verdict came swiftly. "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty on all counts." The gavel struck and the room erupted. Clint stood, his face flushed with rage. "This is a sham," he shouted, but the bailiffs quickly restrained him. Travis slumped in his seat, his confidence shattered. Marcus watched silently as the two men were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge of how much work remained. Later that evening, Marcus attended a community meeting at a local church. The room was packed, standing room only. Residents of Ashwood County, many of whom had lived in fear for years, gathered to discuss the changes taking place. An elderly woman stood, her hands trembling as she clutched a microphone. Her voice wavered at first, but grew stronger as she spoke. "Sheriff Reed," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I just want to thank you. For years, we've been afraid to speak up, afraid to hope. But you've shown us that we don't have to be afraid anymore." The crowd murmured in agreement, a ripple of applause breaking out. A young man, Jordan, the same one Marcus had saved from Clint and Travis's fabricated charges, stood next. His voice was clear and steady. "I thought no one would ever stand up for people like me in this county," he said. "But you did. You proved that justice isn't just a word, it's something worth fighting for." The applause grew louder, and Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. After the meeting, Marcus lingered in the emptying hall. Clara approached, a small smile on her face. "You did it, Sheriff," she said. Marcus shook his head. "We did it, and it's not over. The system's been broken for a long time. It's going to take more than one trial to fix it." Clara nodded. "But it's a start, and the people believe in you. That's not something you see every day." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Let's make sure we give them a reason to keep believing." The elderly woman's hands trembled as she held the microphone, but her voice, though hesitant at first, grew stronger with each word. "Sheriff Reed," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I just want to thank you. For years, we've been afraid to speak up, afraid to hope. But you've shown us that we don't have to be afraid anymore." The crowd murmured in agreement, a ripple of applause breaking out. Then, Jordan, the young man Marcus had saved from Clint and Travis's fabricated charges, stood next. His voice was clear and steady as he spoke. "I thought no one would ever stand up for people like me in this county," he said. "But you did. You proved that justice isn't just a word, it's something worth fighting for." The applause grew louder, and Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. After the meeting, Marcus lingered in the emptying hall. Clara Boyd approached, a small smile on her face. "You did it, Sheriff," she said. Marcus shook his head. "We did it, and it's not over. The system's been broken for a long time. It's going to take more than one trial to fix it." Clara nodded. "But it's a start, and the people believe in you. That's not something you see every day." Marcus allowed himself a faint smile. "Let's make sure we give them a reason to keep believing." The next morning, the sheriff's office buzzed with activity. Deputies worked alongside state investigators, combing through records and processing the arrests of other officers implicated in the corruption scandal. Marcus addressed the department in a short but firm speech. "What happened here will not define us," he said. "We have a chance to rebuild this office into something we can all be proud of. It's going to take time, and it's going to take all of us. But we will do it." For the first time, he saw nods of agreement, even from deputies who had doubted him at first. As Marcus returned to his office, he found a handwritten note waiting on his desk. It read, "Thank you for standing up for us. You've given this county a reason to hope again." He carefully folded the note and placed it in his desk drawer. Though the trial had brought justice for now, Marcus knew it was only the beginning of a long fight to rebuild trust and accountability in Ashwood County. Marcus walked into the sheriff's office early the next morning, a fresh sense of purpose driving him. The air was charged with energy as deputies reorganized case files and conducted interviews with state investigators. The old ways were being uprooted, replaced with a commitment to transparency and accountability. Marcus stood at the head of the conference room table, addressing the department staff. "Starting today," he began, "we implement new protocols for every stop, search, and arrest. Body cameras will be mandatory at all times, and every complaint filed by a citizen will be reviewed by an independent committee." There were murmurs among the deputies, but Marcus's voice rose above them. "This is how we rebuild trust. We don't just say we're better, we prove it with every action we take. If you're not on board, this isn't the place for you." Clara nodded firmly, her expression resolute. One by one, other deputies followed, their hesitance giving way to cautious agreement. Later that afternoon, Marcus joined a community forum held at the local town hall. The room was packed with residents, many of whom had lived in fear for years. Standing at the podium, flanked by local leaders and reform advocates, Marcus addressed the crowd. "The changes we're making aren't just about this department," he began. "They're about this entire community. We can't do this alone. We need your voices, your input, and your trust." A man in the crowd raised his hand. "How do we know this isn't just talk, Sheriff? We've heard promises before." Marcus met the man's gaze steadily. "Because I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to hold me accountable. I'm here to listen, and I'm here to act. Together, we can make Ashwood a place we're all proud of." The room erupted into applause, the first glimmers of hope spreading through the crowd. As the day wound down, Marcus made his way to Sam Brantley's farm. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the fields, and Marcus could see Sam tending to his crops, his figure steady and resolute. Sam looked up as Marcus approached, wiping his hands on his overalls. "Sheriff," he greeted with a faint smile. "Didn't expect to see you out here." Marcus extended his hand. "I came to thank you, Sam, for what you did that night. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." Sam shook his hand, his grip firm. "I just did what any decent man should have done. You're the one who had the guts to take it further." Marcus paused, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "Your courage didn't just save me. It set everything in motion. The people in this county needed to see someone stand up, and you did that. You gave them hope." Sam's eyes softened as he looked out at the horizon. "Hope's a funny thing," he said. "Hard to hold on to sometimes. But I reckon you're the right man to keep it alive." Marcus nodded, a rare smile breaking across his face. Sam gazed out at the horizon, the fading light casting a golden hue across the fields. "Hope's a funny thing," he said softly. "Hard to hold on to sometimes, but I reckon you're the right man to keep it alive." Marcus nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. The next morning, Marcus stood outside the Ashwood County Sheriff's Office as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. The building, once a symbol of fear and corruption, now stood as a beacon of change. Clara Boyd joined him, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Not bad, huh?" she said, nodding toward the horizon. Marcus took a sip, his gaze fixed on the rising sun. "Not bad at all," he replied, a quiet determination in his voice. "But there's still a lot to do." Clara smirked. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Sheriff." As the town began to stir, Marcus felt the weight of the past few weeks begin to lift, even if only slightly. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, he could see the path clearly. Marcus climbed into his patrol car, now freshly repaired and gleaming under the morning sun. As he drove through the streets of Ashwood, he passed neighbors waving, children playing, and businesses opening their doors. For the first time in years, Ashwood County felt alive. Marcus allowed himself a moment to reflect, his hand resting on the badge clipped to his chest. This was just the beginning of the journey, a new dawn for the county and its people, and he was ready to see it through. Marcus Reed's journey reminds us all that standing up for justice is never easy, but it's always worth it. Through his determination, Ashwood County began to heal, proving that even in the darkest places, hope can take root and grow. What would you do if faced with the same challenges Marcus encountered? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and transformation. Together, we can shine a light on the power of resilience and the fight for what's right.